Good afternoon from the KUOW newsroom. This is Seattle Now. I'm Paige Browning with a roundup of today's top stories. It's Monday, June 9th. First, a spotlight on the National Guard. Washington State's Democratic leaders are denouncing President Trump's deployment of Guard members in Los Angeles, with some calling it an abuse of power. The feds deployed California National Guard troops following protests against the president's immigration policies. Washington Attorney General Nick Brown calls the move reckless and political, as well as calling the president's conduct illegal.
We're seeing authoritarianism. We're seeing dictatorial behavior. We're seeing that to suppress what the president believes is the opposition. And we're seeing a disregard for the rule of law, all of which are characteristics of a fascist government.
California's Attorney General is suing the Trump administration over the deployment. Brown says if the same situation played out in Washington, his office would also pursue a legal challenge. U.S. Representative Pramila Jayapal of Seattle is one of those calling it an abuse of power. She said today Trump is weaponizing the military against U.S. citizens and immigrants alike with no regard for the rule of law. She went on to accuse the Trump administration of denying people access to attorneys and calls the actions an attack on immigrants. The deployment came as thousands of people took to the streets to oppose immigration enforcement raids. Protests continued today, and this afternoon, the Pentagon planned to deploy about 700 Marines to Los Angeles. The situation could change overnight after this show drops. Many in Washington state, particularly Democrats, are watching with anxiety.
We're really in a time where it feels like the federal government specifically is acting unlawfully.
Representative Charlotte Mena, a Tacoma Democrat, passed a bill this year in Washington's legislature that limits how the National Guard can be deployed here. The state law can't stop Trump from mobilizing troops in Washington, but Mena's legislation hopes to stop red states from volunteering their forces to come here. Some red states have sent National Guard volunteers to border states on their own dime. And NPR reports the Department of Homeland Security is asking states for 20,000 more volunteers for deportations. An update now on the manhunt in Washington. The search for Travis Decker continues into a second week, and local police have now turned the investigation over to federal authorities. Decker of Wenatchee is accused of killing his 3 young daughters, who were found in a forested area near Leavenworth a week ago. The Chelan County Sheriff's Office says evidence from the crime scene is giving them more information. Law enforcement also found Decker's dog, who's been taken to the Humane Society for safe care. Trump's travel ban kicked in at midnight. How's that playing out here? Officials at SeaTac Airport say they're monitoring how this rollout goes. Hamdi Mohammed is a commissioner for the Port of Seattle. She's watching closely, and she says the port's calling for more transparency in how federal officials detain and interrogate people, namely immigrants, at the airport.
It deepens mistrust. It sends a message that some communities will always be treated with suspicion, regardless of how long they've called the United States home or how much they've contributed.
Mohammed of South King County is also from Somalia, which was on previous travel bans during Trump's last term. This latest ban names 19 predominantly African and Muslim countries. The Trump administration says it's been issued because of national security concerns and because some countries on the list have refused deportations. In a sign we're about to enter summer, the Seattle area saw record high temperatures on Sunday and is under a heat advisory until 10 o'clock tonight. But even with the hot weather, the National Weather Service warns that people should be cautious if they cool off with a swim. Meteorologist Logan Howard says local waters are still dangerously cold.
So at those temperatures, even though it is in the 90s outside, you can still undergo hypothermia in water that cold.
According to the Weather Service, water temperatures around the Puget Sound are in the low 50s, and some local rivers are in the mid-40s. Cold water shock can increase your chances of drowning. with 2 ongoing recalls, it's time to check your fridge and your AC unit. First up, check your eggs. A nationwide recall on large brown eggs has already sickened 79 people in Washington and 6 other states with salmonella. These eggs were sold under several brands, all at Walmart locations between February and early May. The second thing to check is if you have a Medea air conditioner in your window. 1.7 million units are being recalled because water can pool in the units, causing mold to grow. These units were sold at Costco, Home Depot, and Best Buy. Medea is offering repairs or refunds. A housing update: King County home prices have dipped slightly compared to last year. That's partly because there are more new homes than buyers. Joshua McNichols has more.
Seattle had about 10% more homes than buyers in April, according to Redfin. That's just enough to call it a buyer's market. But the slowdown is mild compared to Sunbelt cities like Miami, Austin, and Phoenix. Miami has 3 homes for every person looking to buy. Redfin economist Daryl Fairweather says a lot of people moved to southern states after the pandemic, and developers overbuilt.
People were leaving their office jobs and working remotely, moving to places like Florida, Texas, and Arizona, and builders responded by building a lot of housing. But with the end of the pandemic, remote work and those migration trends started to slow down.
In contrast, tight land and building rules kept Seattle from overbuilding as much as the Sun Belt did. Joshua McNichols, KUOW News.
Another promising piece of economic news: wages in Washington state continue to rise. The state employment security department says the average yearly wage last year was more than $95,000. That's up compared to 2023, when Washingtonians were making an average of about $89,000. On a hot day, we've got some news from the ice. The hockey ice. The Seattle Kraken have officially introduced their new coach, Lane Lambert. The NHL team brought him out today at the team's practice facility. He spent last season as an associate head coach with Toronto and replaces Dan Bylsma, who was dismissed last season. Lambert's the 3rd head coach for the Kraken, who are only entering their 5th season. Meanwhile, in the Professional Women's Hockey League, PWHL Seattle holds its first ever draft tonight. A sports note of another variety: professional athletes in the Seattle area have been the target of a spree of burglaries. Earl Henderson Riley IV is charged with stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of goods, according to King 5 News. He's accused of breaking into the Washington homes of Seattle Mariners players Julio Rodriguez and Luis Castillo, Seattle Seahawks legend Richard Sherman, and Dodgers pitcher Blake Snell. Riley's set to be arraigned in court next week. And that's all for today from the KUOW Newsroom in Seattle. Next time on Seattle Now, Congress is considering big changes to Medicaid, which could mean that 200,000 Washingtonians lose their health insurance.
Folks will come to the doctor if they have a way to pay. They do not want to walk away with a tremendous bill that they either can't pay or will take years to pay off.
Hear that Tuesday morning. Our producer today is Brooklyn Jamerson Flowers, and I'm Paige Browning. Seattle Now and KUOW are members of the NPR network. See you soon.